what's like the vibe check on how the players are feeling about the HIP rule?
That when it comes to compensation, that players need to have a voice at the table. That's the basis of this. That if there are going to be things that affect their compensation or their ability to make money in this league, then it needs to run through the union in the proper process.
Everyone, and welcome back to a very special episode of The Women's Game. I'm Sam Mewis, and today I'm so happy to be joined by Tori Huster, who is here representing the NWSL Players Association. She's a former player herself, a longtime fixture for the Washington Spirit. She's also served as president of the PA, and she is currently the deputy executive director. Tori, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I love your podcast, so I'm excited to be here today.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're here to discuss the news that came out last week about Trinity Rodman staying at the Spirit in a record-breaking deal, and also the status of the high impact player rule. So we're going to break all of this down, but I think I just want to start by asking, what was the Players Association's reaction to the news about Trinity Rodman's new deal?
Honestly, excited for Trin. We want Trin to stay in the league. And I think as a former teammate of Trinity's, playing with her was a joy. Watching her now as a fan and as a staff member of the Players Association, she's still a joy to watch play. And I think there's so many people in agreement that having her in the league it's a positive all around. Having her sign a contract, we are excited for her. If she's excited about that contract, we're on board with that. And I think it's great for the league that she still wants to play here.
Yeah, I know. I think we were all like a little bit relieved. You know, there have been so many big name players, not so many, but there have been a few big name players going overseas. And I think it's safe to say everybody's really happy that Trinity is staying here. It's a win for the league. She's a world-class player. She's so popular. And the contract itself, I think, is like really pushing boundaries for women's soccer players everywhere. But I know we're still kind of dealing with this high impact player rule. We're going to call that the HIP rule from here on out. This is what I need a little bit of clarity on. If that rule, which we'll get into in a second, like the details of the rule, but if that rule does not hold up as the NWSLPA kind of believes it shouldn't, what is your understanding of what would happen with Trinity's contract?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there can be some misconceptions that because we have an active grievance, and as excited as we are as Trin's that she's staying in the league, there are two active grievances, one about the HIP rule and then one about Trin's free agency rights when her former contract was rejected back in December. My timelines and my months all kind of blend together. But yeah, those grievances are still pending. And that process is going to play out. Our grievance and arbitration process will play out. But a contract is a contract, and Trin has signed that. The labor attorneys are going to do their thing, but we don't believe that the league would have any, they wouldn't pull her contract simply, if our grievance on the HIP rule is successful, her contract would still stand. So she's not going anywhere simply because we have a grievance on the table still.
Okay, that feels like that's a good place to start. And I know we kind of, went into that there's two grievances and what each one is. But I feel like baseline, it is good to know that Trinity feels like safe, like she's staying with the Spirit. This is still a record-breaking contract. It's still a big deal. And in fact, the PA is happy. This is a celebration. I think everybody can be happy and like consider this contract a positive thing and this incredible thing for Trinity. So I do, to your point, kind of want to back up and explain how we got here. Like you said, in December before the holidays, Trinity and the Spirit had agreed to a deal during Trinity's free agency, but the league didn't approve of that deal. The league, of course, wanted Trinity to stay, but they believed that the contract that Trinity and the Spirit had agreed to kind of violated the spirit of the CBA of the league. We spoke with your colleague, Megan Burke, right around this time, and she described this kind of as the NWSL putting their thumb on the scale of negotiations and unfairly intervening because they disagreed with some aspect of this contract. And so this is where that first grievance got filed about Trinity's free agency rights. That's filed on Trinity's behalf by the Players Association. I want to, for my sake and maybe everybody else's sake, can you just remind us what a grievance is and why it's the PA's job to file that on Trinity's behalf?
I'll try and keep this in non-legal terms as much as I can.
I'm
certainly not a lawyer, so I don't even know if I have those terms, but a grievance is basically when the union feels that management, in this case, NWSL, has violated the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, or any provision of it. And in this case, and I know back when we announced the signing of the 2024 CBA, we felt that it was a success for both sides and for just soccer in general in our country, that we were able to create a space in a league where every player is a free agent, Trin included. And when the league put their thumb on the scale to a contract that the Spirit and Trin had potentially agreed to, that violated Trin's free agency rights, her ability to negotiate a contract with any club of her choosing, without the league kind of getting involved in that. In the spirit of the rules was kind of the language that was used at the time. I think that it was basically they thought that the salary cap would have been involved to an extent that it shouldn't have been, or that it would outkick that coverage of the salary cap. And on our estimation, that was certainly not the case. Or we also believe that there are other ways to manage the salary cap rules, or the rules that are around that.
That all makes total sense. And I think, even me hearing this, I'm being reminded so much of my conversation that I had with Megan Burke in December. And so I just want to urge any listeners who want even more clarity about this first grievance, the one about the deal that never came to fruition, to maybe go back and listen to that episode with Megan Burke. But as it stands right now, Tori, that grievance is still active. And
Correct.
Can you just explain, is it active? Would it solve anything for Trinity, or is it just kind of like a precedent? Would it set a precedent for future free agency issues?
It would baseline, foundationally or fundamentally, make sure that the free agency rights for any and all players are respected. And
clearly defined, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah. So while in these instances, Trin is the grievant, it is beneficial for every player that we file the grievance. That is just just the situation that happened, and on Trinity's behalf. That's why we filed the grievance. But it would stand for all players. Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. And where does that stand now? What's the next thing we would expect to hear about that?
That is in the grievance process right now, and lawyers are going to lawyer, so it's sometimes it can move slowly. Yes, but
okay.
We're hoping that it is solved in less than a few months.
All right, amazing. So let's leave that first grievance on the side and, move on to all of this other news that we now have to cover. A few weeks after the original Trinity deal was denied by the league, the NWSL dropped this big announcement that there was this new policy called the High Impact Player Rule. This is a set of criteria defined by the league that factors in things like marketability, U.S. women's national team playing time, in order to determine which players teams can spend up to $1 million on outside of the salary cap. The reaction to this was immediately pretty controversial, and I want to point out for context some players that would not be eligible for high impact player status: young U.S. women's national team stars like Jaden Shaw, Emma Sears, and Fallon Tullis-Joyce, Euros winning Lionesses Jess Carter and Esme Morgan, and then two of the league's all-time top scorers, Lynn Biondolo and Sam Kerr, would not meet the criteria for this rule. So, Tori, I think we kind of all know the fan reaction to this rule was that it seems unfair. Can you talk to me a little bit about your reaction? What stood out to you and the PA the most as a potential problem in the HIP rule?
The first problem is that this affects player compensation, and our position is that player compensation needs to be collectively bargained, that's a mandatory topic of bargaining. Also, that we just signed a CBA, a year and a half before this rule came out, and we had said, salary caps need to be higher, and we want to get more people over here. That's why we pushed very hard for free agency and all of that. And so I think when we first saw this rule, our our position is that compensation needs to be negotiated. The players need to have a voice at the seat of the table when compensation is in discussion. And we didn't have that. This was I think that's our biggest problem with it. I think when I put my former player hat on, it's absolutely unfair. I don't think that there should be a separate pot of money for a subjective list of criteria, which, to your point, excludes a lot of really good athletes, a lot of really good players who have also spent their career in NWSL and have created value of their own. And Lynn is a perfect example. She should have access to this money as much as anybody else should.
Yeah, I think there's like a few deep-seated problems within the rule. I think to look at it like from what the NWSL was trying to accomplish with the rule, part of me gets what they wanted to accomplish. They want to attract and retain big-name players and have more money to offer them. But I think the problem there, and again, there are several problems there. The conclusion I made when I spoke with Megan Burke in December was basically, let's just raise the salary cap by $1 million. It doesn't throw away the salary cap. It doesn't double it. It's like this, maybe the CBA didn't account for the growth of the league and the growth of salaries in the exact way that it could have. And now if we all agree the salary cap should be higher, we don't need to create this like complicated and arbitrary and subjective list of criteria. We can just raise the salary cap and account for exactly what we need to account for. So I think issue number one I want to talk about is this idea of like marketability. Why do you think the NWSL is wanting to use like lists, best of lists, and this idea of marketability, knowing that each player brings something totally unique to the league? We have players from South America, Asia, Africa, who can't qualify for this list because they're not getting minutes with the U.S. women's national team. They're not qualifying for these lists, which are also subjective in the sense that they may prioritize Western beauty standards, or marketability feels like a big buzzword that's a problem to me. Can you just talk to me a little bit about the PA's perspective on that?
The perspective I guess I'll speak to is that there's this, level of weight on the commercializing of the league. And I think the Western beauty standards are 100% a problem because these lists give more weight to Europeans. They give more weight to Americans. And I think that's problematic. It's difficult to get around from a fairness standpoint. And I think right now, when we have this growth of the league happening, where we want to attract players from all over the world, and the league has sent themselves the best players in the world, having a more complicated system, which again, in the most recent contract, we tried to make easier. And we hear from internationals all the time, the rules are really complicated. They're hard and difficult to understand. And it serves as a barrier to those players coming over here. Now the league has just gone and implemented another rule that has a lot of criteria and a lot of difficulty behind it. And the simple version, or the simple solution, is raising the salary cap. That doesn't require owners to use the full salary cap. And maybe some aren't even doing that right now. So it's bewildering to me why we're going to make something so complicated when really the league is still really new, and setting a good foundation for what we're going to build upon, certainly while we're growing very quickly, is important. And I think this rule was put in place a little bit too fast.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it feels like this hasty idea that solves problems for one group of people. And to me, that group of people is the owners, who it feels to me are kind of reclaiming control over how the salary cap gets distributed. When, from my perspective, the general managers, it's their job to use their discretion to use whatever percentage of the salary cap their owner wants them to. I feel that creating this, again, complicated set of rules that kind of handholds the GMs into only being able to use certain pots of money for certain players is actually not letting the GMs do their job and use their discretion in the way that they've been hired to do. And so I think, again, the answer to me seems clear: to raise the salary cap by $1 million. GMs will then use their discretion, do their jobs, work with their owners, work with their coaching staff. I guess to simplify even more the PA's view, what is the purpose of the salary cap?
The salary cap benefits the league, the owners, having a certain amount that every year you have to spend only serves those with the budget. It doesn't serve the players. And I think having these certain rules around it, to your point, also it doesn't have an accountability measure for the general managers either. Now, I think that's going to make it really unclear whether the owners are really in it to win championships. And I think it's going to make it confusing, I think, for general managers, why it is they are constructing the roster they want to construct. Is it for commercial reasons to get butts in seats, or is it to actually have a go at a championship? And I think wherever they land on that, if you don't give the GM the ability to construct that roster, it's going to be really hard for owners to hold them accountable, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, it's tough, as a former player, like I see the league and soccer. I'm like, of course, every owner should want to win a championship. And I guess, existing out here in this other world where like so much of it is about business and revenue and making money and getting butts in seats and selling jerseys, I guess owners, to their discretion, could have a different goal. It might not be to win a championship every year. It might be to have a great community around your team that sells out their games and has popular players, and maybe they compete and maybe they don't. I guess that is like owner discretion, even though I think maybe to fans it doesn't sound as appealing. I want to keep, instead of making this big like existential question, I do want to try and keep myself focused on the players and what's best for the league. So can you answer if you think the league could do without a salary cap?
I think so. I mean, I definitely think that you're giving clubs the freedom to use their money how they want to. And I think that just makes it more clear then to the players what the owners or that club stands for. I think it is just about being truthful and about being honest about what you're in this game for. And maybe there are some owners who have been in it for a while and they've invested what they can invest, and they've maybe reached their ceiling to the extent that it potentially holds the club back or holds the league back in a way where if they can't invest anymore, that they do need to be honest about that. And players going to those markets need to know, I'm just going to get minutes here. We're not necessarily going for a championship. And I think that's kind of what we had anticipated, with free agency, that there's a number of reasons why any players would go to certain teams. Whether their family's there or, there's so many reasons why you choose, or, on the flip side of things, where do they get a contract offer as well? But I think it's just about being truthful and honest in like why you're in this game, why you're part of the league. And I think holding the league back because there can't be that investment that is now needed to push the league forward, or to have a bigger salary cap if there is one, or to not have one. I think, it's just about being truthful in that.
This is all making sense. And I feel, everybody kind of has like an emotional or a gut reaction to something. And I feel talking it through and, hearing other people's opinions on it is validating and helpful to understand like the bigger picture things outside my like gut reaction to this. I think I just have two more questions. One being, obviously, this whole thing has been extremely public. It has been surrounding Trinity Rodman's contract negotiation, her free agency. There's this record-breaking deal. But there are hundreds of other players who, to your point earlier, these rules will apply to, who need the same considerations. What do you think this whole thing, what message is this sending to the players? What's like the vibe check on how the players are feeling about the hip rule?
that when it comes to compensation, that players need to have a voice at the table. That's the basis of this. That if there are going to be things that affect their compensation or their ability to make money in this league, then it needs to run through the union in the proper process. When it becomes this complex set of rules, you'll have a spectrum where players are kind of like, what does this even mean? Why are we making this so difficult? The same things we're talking about now are the conversations we're having with players, trying to get them to understand what the rule itself even means, because there hasn't been a whole lot of explanation. And then you just get the question of, well, why are we making this so hard? Let's simplify, let's keep things as simple as possible while we're still growing this thing and while we want to have a really strong foundation. But it ultimately it should be a topic that is discussed in collective bargaining. And the fact that it wasn't, I think, sends a really strong message from the league that the players aren't important when it comes to their compensation.
Okay. That was like that the last line threw me off because I was like, that frustrates me to hear that. As somebody who like was, a part of the unions of the NWSL and of the U.S. Women's National Team when I played, I have so much pride in like the strength of the union and what you all can accomplish. And so I really want the league to have, more respect for what belongs in a negotiation. As far as this grievance that we're talking about, the hip rule grievance, that's in a similar process that is going to just be arbitrated and the lawyers are discussing it over the coming months.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So just to wrap up and just zoom out a little bit, I think the NWSL is obviously a unique league. We have a lot of independent women's teams. And I think with the growth, the expansion, the way it's set up, there's actually a real opportunity to do things differently here in the NWSL, to be really creative about how to adjust to a changing soccer landscape. I think soccer is one of the few American sports where teams are competing with other countries for players. And I think that like holds us accountable to standards and salaries in a way that not every American sport is like dealing with. If we put salaries aside for just a second and you think big picture, in what ways do you think the NWSL can be the most attractive place for players to spend their careers and lives?
It's a great question because we want the best players here. We know the league wants that. We know we want that. And there already are so many good players in this country that have, maybe never played for the national team. I was one of those players. I never played for the national team, but I had so much pride in playing for the Washington Spirit and playing there for my whole career. And when other players look to this league and they see, and this is another opportunity, they see where players are respected, where they're supported and valued for a number of different reasons, not just for their marketability. I think that sends a really good message globally, that this is a league where players are respected, their voices and their opinions matter. That is the standard that you and I as players really wanted to grow. I think we saw that happen, and we need to see that happen here and moving forward. And I think right now we're just asking that question if those standards are being met. We as the union, I don't think will ever waver in protecting those values. We definitely think that NWSL is the most competitive place to play, but for all the reasons that we want it to continue to be attractive, that the contract in place, the CBA in place is enforced, or it is followed. The things that we agreed to are followed. We want to make sure that those things happen, and protecting that is definitely, that's our role. And I know the players need us to do that here too.
Very well said. We here at the Women's Game are so grateful to you and the rest of the PA for taking time to talk this through with us. I think our listeners will really appreciate it as well. And I just want to say again, as a former player, I really do understand the importance of the union. And I'm so grateful that your team over there is fighting for the rights of all the players and protecting them. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And we'll stay tuned and hope to see some good results from these grievances.
Thanks, Sam.